Last week, the Australian Bureau of Statistics released its latest Births Australia report, and the results are not good. The total fertility rate was 1.5 births per woman. To put that in perspective, that's the lowest fertility rate since European settlement. A rate of less than 2.1 will ultimately result in a population decline, without taking into consideration immigration, of course. It's not as bad as, say, countries like South Korea, which has the world's lowest fertility rate of around 0.7, which their president has recently declared as a demographic national emergency. Last month, the ABC were reporting that Australia's population reached 27 million, largely driven by overseas migration. Looking at their chart, it's clear that so-called natural increases play only a small part in Australia's population growth. The majority of growth is now attributed to net overseas migration. Australians aren't having enough babies, so the government turn on the immigration tap. They note that the dip in population growth in 2021 was largely driven by the pandemic. But interestingly, do you remember the reports from a few years ago? Pandemic baby boom. Will global lockdown see massive jump in Australia's birth rate? Could Tasmania be having the predicted baby boom? Pandemic-fueled IVF baby boom. Of course, hindsight is 2020. The baby boom never eventuated. Quite the opposite. It's clear that you can't just lock everybody up in their homes and expect them to procreate like some kind of caged animal. Actually, animals born in captivity are only half as likely to reproduce compared to their wild counterparts. It turns out we need our freedom. As an aside, the two most left-leaning states or territories, the ACT and Victoria, recorded lower birth rates than the rest of the nation. Go figure. So what do you think is causing Australia's historically low birth rate? My first thought was to look at our ABC, as I know they would definitely have something interesting to say. The Story of Us, they titled it. What do you think they talk about? Go on, take a guess. What's the first thing we often hear in Australia? Well, first they mentioned the numbers. Altogether, these numbers contributed to a record-breaking increase of 1 million people in under 2 years. But then, unsurprisingly, they talk about First Nations Australians. Terra nullius was a lie. They always have to bring up our dark history. Ancestors of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people used sophisticated and planned navigation systems to island hop to the Australian megacontinent more than 50,000 years ago. At least they're using the more conservative 50,000 years ago figure. British colonisation after 1788 brought with it displacement, sexual violence, infectious diseases, and the massacre of First Nations people who had thrived here for tens of thousands of years. Yes, get ready for the lecture. Liberal Party leader Sir Joseph Cook argued that immigration was a tool for maintaining the highest white standards. To achieve it, First Nations Australians endured ongoing harms in the name of the colonial project, generating adverse impacts that continue to this day. Women and children suffered in the call for peopling and procreation. To attract immigrants, they used posters like this: Australia, the land of tomorrow. For many women, the poor and First Nations Australians, this land of tomorrow rhetoric would have felt very remote from reality. The government at the time tried to encourage women to have more children. The call of the stars to British men and women, men for the land, women for the home. But by 1976, the birth rate dropped again to below the rate of replacement, where it has remained ever since. Noting that 4 years earlier, according to the National Museum, in 1972, in his first 10 days in office, Prime Minister Gough Whitlam abolished the luxury tax on all contraceptives and placed the pill on the pharmaceutical benefits scheme list, reducing its cost to $1 per month. I'm not saying that's the cause, but it certainly wouldn't have helped. Finally, in the ABC article, after the long-winded Australia-hating lecture, they mentioned the record low fertility rate of 1.5 babies per woman. There has been no Gen Z pandemic baby boom. Of course, they point out that migrants aren't to blame for Australia's multiple crises, and of course they state that gender inequality needs to be revisited. Gender, First Nation Australians, colonisation. It's amazing they didn't somehow squeeze the LGBT community in there somehow. It's funny, the rhetoric in these articles is always, First Nations people had their land stolen, but immigration is good. But don't those 2 points run counter to one another? Do Aboriginal Australians agree with all this immigration? More people coming to their lands without their approval? None of this comes as much of a surprise, really, when you take a look into the author, Liz Allen. Dr. Liz Allen, known by her handle Dr. Demography, is a demographer at the Australian National University. If you look at some of her tweets, things become a bit clearer. To the women publicly talking about their... Thank you. Sorry, I can't mention that word without getting demonetised. Male contraception, a growing business with game changers, linking to an article that states, there is fresh hope for men to control their fertility. Yep, that will help our fertility crisis. Migrants don't inflate house prices. Migrants don't steal local jobs. Migrants don't suppress wages. Stop spouting hateful rubbish. Australians are not achieving their desired family size because the barriers to having children are insurmountable. This is a catastrophe. Housing, economic security, gender inequality, and climate change. Gender inequality? I take issue with that being used as a reason why ladies aren't having children. Historically, Australia's fertility rate was highest in 1961 at 3.55 babies per woman. Was gender inequality not an issue back then? I'd argue that in 2024, women are the most equal they have ever been, but yet the birth rate continues to plummet. Obviously, this is not the first time she's tweeted about this. My tips for more babies. Gender equality. If we look at the WEF's latest Global Gender Gap Report, 2023, the countries that perform the worst are often in sub-Saharan Africa. Democratic Republic of Congo, Mali, Chad. Now, if we look at fertility rates again, which countries have the highest fertility rates? Countries like Mali, 5.6, Chad, 6.1, and DR Congo, 6.1. The countries with the worst gender equality also have some of the highest fertility rates in the world. So what the hell is Dr. Demography talking about? It seems like gender inequality correlates with higher fertility rates, opposite to what she's implying. On Instagram, she writes, young Australians are confronted with great uncertainty, housing affordability, cost of living, gender inequality, and climate boiling are presenting insurmountable obstacles to achieving desired families. She also tweets about climate boiling. This is such an alarmist term and not even accurate. It's designed purely to try to scare people. Scientifically, boiling clearly means at or near boiling point. So in the case of water, 100 degrees Celsius. Why would Dr. Demography use such hyperbolic language? Although she might be onto something with climate boiling. This is an article from The Guardian from before the pandemic. Birth strikers meet the women who refuse to have children until climate change ends. They might be waiting a long time because the climate has been changing for at least the last 500 million years. I doubt it's going to stop anytime soon. According to their website, the Birth Strike Movement, are you terrified about the future that lies ahead for contemporary and future youth? You can protect children while fighting climate change and systemic corruption by refusing to procreate. I wonder if they understand if they breed themselves out of existence, then there'll be none of them left to fight climate change. The rest of the world will just move on, presumably, without worrying about it. So how's their plan going to work exactly? Anyway, I think you get the idea. The fertility rate is in free fall because of gender inequality and climate boiling.